Lindsay Ravel and Heritage Professional Products, as well as Pest West, and you for attending and taking your valuable time to join me in this discovery of Quantum X, a novel LED system technology. Well, let's get started. I'm Dr. Stuart Mitchell, a resident entomologist for Pest West, USA. Okay. There we go. Okay. Disclaimer, this presentation is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace independent professional judgment. So what am I? Well, I'm about 0.40 inches long, weigh very little, fly 4.5 to 15 miles an hour, most active 2 to 4 p.m., live about 60 days, disperse 65 feet, 27 miles, see with mosaic vision, hear and feel with my bodily hairs, taste with my feet, communicate with pheromones, and locate malodorous food-filled dumpsters. I am the ultimate dumpster diver. Interesting bio here. Anyone? Aha, I am a housefly. We'll see you inside, regardless of what you do. Interestingly, a study demonstrated that when a housefly's legs are stimulated by an appetitive food source, in other words, a viable nutrition base, appetitive food source, favorable food source, mouth parts extend for consumption, whereas contact with aversive or negative compounds inhibits extension. Fly lands, a lot of micro cues, land on that food source, nutrient base, resource site, and go to work. Right away, the pseudoesophagus comes down autonomically and begins to consume. Appetitive food source. Interestingly, true flies nutriate or consume through extraoral digestion. Extraoral digestion involves recycling of saliva, essentially, regurgitation of saliva and its contents, kind of like a blender. Bill flies consume about 1.5 to 2.3 times their body mass through extraoral cyclic regurgitation. That doesn't sound particularly yummy at breakfast time, but that's how they consume. We'll get into more of that. But interestingly, as we know, pests infest with that pestiferity. Pests foul or adulterate far more than they directly consume. Another study demonstrated houseflies are morphologically, physiologically, and behaviorally suited to serve as disease vectors, moving not only mechanically or by their bodily presence, but also to some degree biologically by sharing the bacterial elements, pathogens, and saliva as they cycle it down to the surface in consuming food and other ways. Of course, grooming themselves, their body, their wings, their legs, their mouth parts, sharing all those particulates that are shed onto the surface, as well as that cyclical regurgitation of saliva during consumption. But aha, prior to taking off, modern avionics, let's reduce the weight. They'll shed some feces as well, sharing all of those things on whatever surface they happen to land upon. Other studies demonstrated that among the collected flies from dumpsters, number one resource site for invading flies were housefly, musca domestica about 47%, cast characters involving blowflies and bottle flies, but significant synanthropic pests from outside in, if you will, housefly. Food residues in dumpsters will attract pests. These are rich resource sites for various types of pests. Certainly an initial staging point for invading a structure or facility, if improperly kept, have to be a dumpsterologist. We wear a lot of hats, pest management professionals, public health professionals, dumpsterologists, trashologists, entomologists, all sorts of things and practices in play. Study also concluded that overall the prevalence of foodborne pathogens was 3 times greater in the guts than on the body surfaces of flies. So that cyclical regurgitation becomes significant in pathogen transfer from filth to food and sensitive surfaces and environments. Of course, from a pest's plate to your plate. Don't know about you, but I don't know what this serves, but the cumulative effect of pest presence, adulteration, contamination of food resources, processing resources, storage resources can be significant at the end, resulting in foodborne illness in the form of foodborne infection or foodborne toxicosis, or even foodborne allergens. I don't know if anyone recalls the book The Jungle, written by Upton Sinclair in 1906. Main character and plot follows the life of an immigrant in Chicago struggling to survive the meatpacking industry. Corruption in the industry, exploitation of the working class, so on. The impact was portrayal of unsanitary conditions, leading to public outcry, sort of moved toward the food safety realm. Well, was significant safety reforms prior to the Food Protection Act, but we had the Pure Food and Drug Act and Meat Inspection Act 1906. So it led to at least a beginning of food safety, reshaping public policy, labor rights, and industry regulations. More importantly, helping to at least get an initial handle on safe food processing, handling, storage prior to consumption. Of course, we know the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is in play, as well as FSMA and Hep C, all sorts of things in play in food facilities. And those food facilities, if they are FDA inspected, will eventually experience same. As a result, in some cases, the FDA will issue a Form 483 letter on notice of inspectional observations. Interestingly, under objectionable practices, source AIB, pest control was 20.9% of violations resulting in Form 483s, which could result ultimately in recall or shutdown in the worst case scenarios. But it shows here as a CGMP that pest control has a significant impact on food safety throughout the food production chain. We are protectors of our food safety, and a significant element there of public health. Salmonella kind of leading the way, along with Campylobacter, Listeria, and others. Whole cast of characters there. But salmonella is readily moved or mechanically moved, biologically moved from point A to point illness. That can be a result from vertebrate pests as well as invertebrate pests. Flies are significant or can be significant in moving salmonella, resulting in food contamination. Of course, ultimately consumed. It's a pathogenic strain of salmonella, can result in salmonellosis and a significant constellation of symptoms resulting, most importantly or most significantly, pathology of the liver, enlarged liver, hepatomegaly, which can be life-threatening downstream, but salmonella is a significant foodborne illness, can result in death, unfortunately, and something that is surveilled quite significantly through the food production chain. Source CDC, annual U.S. foodborne illness, FBI, about 1 in 6 Americans. That's 48 million people. I think you're aware of these statistics, but about 128,000 hospitalizations, 3,000 deaths. So food allergy, food infection, food toxicosis are all very significant in the U.S. and are constantly under significant scrutiny as far as resulting in food safety. If you follow FDA or USDA, you can see the various types of recalls or recalls from food contamination, allergens being the first in line, but also the others that involve infectious pathogens. In my experience, I'm seeing more and more FDA recalls under current regulation, but we have a significant impact. We are practitioners, public health, as well as pest management.
Here's a really bad situation. This is a food establishment. We won't tell you where, but you can see that they're asking for trouble, fly trouble. Not only do they have open doors that lead to the food preparation area, but they also have trash cans right outside those open doors. And to make matters worse, there's a lot of standing water around the trash cans. You probably remember the triangle of life from past PCBN programs. This simple little graphic outlines what pests need to survive: food, water, and shelter. All three needs are very handily addressed in this situation. Talk about an open invitation to flies.
Well, interesting retro pest control. Thank Dr. Ted Gronowski and Pest Control Video Network for these videos. As we progress, we learn more and more. We know and recognize that many things don't change. Those resource sites, those conducive conditions, which were noted in the video, we continue to have these. If we look at the overall elements of integrated pest management and assessment thereof, one of the worst, or I should say, one of the more challenging, one of the worst violations are behavioral. We have that behavioral control, getting people or inhabitants of the facility or the building or the structure to do things correctly. Best practices in handling trash, best practices in hygiene, sanitation, of course, best practices in pest management, not always aligned and always need constant evaluation, assessment, changes that need to be conducted constantly, as no food, no pests is the goal, but hardly ever achieved, but certainly the goal, because pests are resource driven. They are literally flying infections waiting to happen somewhere else, moving from filth to food, feces to food, and areas in between. They are a direct assault to food safety. Interestingly, let's take a look at the compound eyes before we get a little more into LED filament technology and give you a little bit of compound eyes 101 so we have better understanding. Think of insect light traps, all mechanical systems or anything with a lure of some sort to attract pests, whether it's a bait matrix or a attractive nuisance, whatever the type of attraction to that device. We look at that, the attraction or bait essentially in an insect light trap is the UVA light. These are phototopic or daytime flyers. They're highly attracted to the faster light, if you will, the higher frequencies of light, the shorter wavelengths. As the wavelengths get shorter into blue and UVA, that's their attraction point. That's what essentially draws them or lures them to the insect light trap. So light is the bait. Then we use, of course, a glue board system or a stun grid, essentially an electrocutor to drop them into a capture tray. But the strategy here is to effectively lure the flying insects to the light trap. Our model organism, housefly. So if we look at housefly and UVA light, housefly possesses compound eyes that are sensitive to UVA light at between 350 and 400 nanometers, or there are key wavelengths in there that initiate phototransduction or reaction to an external stimulus, that being optimum attraction to the appropriate wavelength of light, have specialized photoreceptors that allow them or UVA light to influence their vision as well as their behavior, of course, resulting in attraction to our deployed devices. Reactions of houseflies to LED UVA light. Housefly is naturally attracted to these light sources. There's UVA light, sunlight, of course. For example, the shorter wavelengths of light we see in yellow-green, or like 540 nanometer range, whereas flies, again, are, as we know from testing, reproducible results, scientific method are especially attracted between 350 and 370. So we tune our lamps to that, whether they're fluorescent or UVA, LED UVA. We are essentially domesticating that strong phototropic behavior and using it against them. So we use a higher functioning physiology that is well studied, and housefly is a visual system, and use it against them, domesticate it. LED UVA light sources emit wavelengths that attract flies, again, positively phototropic or positive positive phototropism behavior. Navigation UVA light assists in housefly navigation, allows them to distinguish objects and surfaces, not only just the wavelength, but ultimate Stokes shift of fluorescence, various types of surfaces, including food surfaces. Surface mounted device LED UVA bright spots may affect some navigation in the more initial generation of LED UVA light traps, and some of these bright spots, depending on orientation on SMDs, can result in a little bit of disorientation and altering flight patterns, or perhaps muting or changing the attraction pattern as the fly navigates in and around to explore the insect light trap device before committing to and engaging the glue board or stun grid. So reactions of housefly LED UVA light, specific photoreceptor cells, called them ommatidia, inside the compound eyes respond to UVA light. These little six-sided lenslets called ommatidia, they work together collectively in groups of 6, providing that mosaic vision, if you will, mosaic vision. UVA light, again, influences their visual perception and how they interact with their environment. It affects feeding behavior, obviously. Housefly tracks to ability to locate food sources through, in some cases, fluorescence. UVA light influences that both appetitive and aversive surface. Flies are not necessarily as random as we think when they land on a surface. They don't live very long. They're in high survival mode. They have the more advanced holometabolic strategy of reproduction. Non-parental care, of course, lots of offspring nonetheless. When a fly lands, the fly knows what it's doing, and lots of micro cues coming in milliseconds allow that fly to make instantaneous decisions to land on a surface, which may, in some cases, in due course, be life-threatening to the flies. So rather significant decision and decision process involved in external stimulation to that, be lured to that particular surface. So rhodopsin, interestingly, leads to phototransduction. A lot of these polysyllabic words this morning, probably a little too early for that. But nonetheless, this is how it happens. This is how we make it happen with our insect light traps. Compound eyes of housefly contain ommatidia with photoreceptors containing rhodopsin. An organism has visual processing, it has rhodopsin. This opsin protein, which denatures or changes shape in reaction to various photon energies or wavelengths or colors of light, if you will. It undergoes a conformational change when or if that UVA light or whatever wavelength of light is received. Then it initiates a phototransduction or a neurological response, neurological plasticity, if you will, to response to that external stimulus, leading it toward that source, unless that source is outcompeted by other external stimuli going on. Then that instantaneous reaction can occur and this behavior is modified and changed. Phototransduction is certainly a significant response to a stimulus. It's rates up there with reproductive drives, appetitive or nutritional, metabolic drives. These high-end processes or high-end behaviors are significant to, obviously, preservation of their genome and reproductive capacity. And so phototransduction is very effective at being manipulated or domesticated at helping to monitor and control flies and fly pressure, and ultimately fly sources or resource sites and eliminating those. Rhodopsin is light-sensitive pigment. undergo structural change upon absorbing UVA photons. We then have signal transduction, where UVA will trigger a biochemical reaction or cascade. And then the neural transmission, of course, electrical signals are generated by the photoreceptor cells and transmitted to the brain via the neurons. There's enough of those signals, it'll lead to an action potential, and we're reacting to that stimulus. Enough neurological, enough of those neurons, or significant number of those neurons saying, hey, that's a great thing, let's go that way. Enough stimulated in that type behavior, they'll move toward it. So of course, signals carry information about UVA light, such as wavelength, intensity, and spatial characteristics. Lux, if you will. Lux, which is a measure of illumination. Lux being 1 lumen. 1 lumen is a birthday candle, roughly 1 foot distance of light. And a lux is 1 lumen over 1 square meter at 1 meter distance. And that's how we test our insect light traps. In the laboratory, we will, we'll discuss a couple of methods, but we use in this particular case, we're going to illustrate capture efficacy through the mean replicant testing method. There is also a methodology called electroretinogram, where the ventral nerve cord as well as the brain have electrodes introduced, and the fly or that particular insect is held in a stationary pattern. It can move its legs, it can move its wings, its head, all the typical things that would go on in the flight and locomotion, whether it's terrestrial, aerial, and different wavelengths of light are passed over, not just necessarily in front, but over the flying insect, particular model organism here, the housefly. We see how it reacts to that light. And depending on, again, that neurological response, those action potentials, we can determine or sort of tune in. We can't know what a fly thinks, but we can know what it reacts to. So we can do that through an electroretinogram or electroretinogram, where odors and other things, food molecules, malodors from putrefaction, or favorable molecules such as food molecules of fermentation. But all these types of sensory inputs can be measured. And so we learn, 365 nanometers is a very significant wavelength, very specifically very attractive to both male and female houseflies as our model organism. So the visual processing in houseflies and the brain electrical signals are processed. They're integrated from the ommatidia, and if there's a significant number of neurological input, then they will react to that stimulus. And of course, visual representation of the environment is created. That allows perception, navigation, response to UVA light, and other things, in particular coordinate transformation, and a little more interesting terms. I like these polysyllabic words, but coordinate transformation is like our own proprioception, where we know where we are in space and time through micro input through our various senses, and we're able to negotiate through space using our various types of senses, which are actually numerous. In this particular case, coordinate transformation is transformation of visual cues into appropriate motor commands. In other words, the fly is able to interpret where it is in space and time and react to it. In this case, the external stimulus to react to is the UVA light that's being emitted and distributed through the particular insect light trap device that is deployed. And of course, insects use these compound eyes to detect and track visual stimuli, such as landmarks, objects, and patterns, allows navigation and orientation during flight, even reproductive capacity. The male the male housefly has what appears to be eyes seem to be touching because the body is smaller. The compound eyes take up more surface area, but that allows them a significant strategy for finding females. The more fit male flies will find the more fit female flies. And if the insemination is accepted by the female fly, then offspring are assured. Genetic fitness, Darwinian stuff, that type of thing. But house flies, interestingly, can react to an external stimulus in 50 milliseconds, very, very quickly. Micro decisions. So lots of decisions to be made. You only live a couple of weeks, few days, few hours. Every decision you make can be significant to not only your life or length or longevity, but as well as fitness to reproduce. Very significant there. An energy of 365, we understand that 365 nanometer range is approximately about 3.4 electron volts. So that energy is associated with conformational change when it contacts rhodopsin through the compound eye, through the ommatidia, through all the other types of anatomy and physiology going on there. And that is very attractive to musca domestica. And if we understand these processes a little better, that helps us to optimize the placement of our insect light traps, rather than the sort of, oh, there's a wall outlet, I'll put it there. That the wall outlet theory of insect light trap deployment is not particularly effective. And sometimes power sources and other things need to be created for those particular deployments. So LEDs and FUVA, differing fly attraction. We look at FUVA. FUVA uses electricity, heat to light, essentially. Very simply put, fluorescent light emitting UVA requires an awful lot of energy to produce a lot of heat. A lot of that, the energy is lost in heat, and ultimately a very small percentage of the overall energy input results in light. And they could be result in blue light, UVA. We see the blue light being emitted from a BL lamp, a fluorescent BL lamp, because there's no woods glass to block it. So we see the blue light, but we don't see the UVA, but flies are attracted to both of those particular wavelengths. So we emit it. Electroluminescence, on the other hand, uses electricity and converts electricity to light, takes far less energy, produces very little heat. So it's an electrical phenomenon where materials emit light in response to passage of electrical current. This is called an LED, or light emitting diode. And a light emitting diode, we'll take a little bit closer look at it, but these are two strategies. FUVA, fluorescent, electricity, heat to light. Electroluminescence, electricity to light. We look at a LED. We can see this here. There's what are called P&N junctions, and a material that is doped with inhibitors and other conductive materials that creates a barrier or a depletion layer. This is where the negative side is tracked to the P side, and that depletion layer or junction is reduced when the circuit is open. Then that allows electron flow. Electrons move toward the holes, and that reuniting area, or that gap depletion layer, closes, and you have movement of electrons from the negative to the positive. But those electrons, as you know, want to reduce their energy through entropy, so they do so. When they make that commitment in that recombination, there's a release of energy to bring them back to a lower state of energy to start the cycle all over again. As long as electricity is flowing, there's a forward bias. The current's always flowing forward. And so it's like it's converting DC to AC current, essentially. So you have all the activity on one end with a driver in the LED lamp. But this pretty much results in release of a photon, much like in a fluorescent lamp. We have electrodes producing heat. That heat excites a inert gas, usually argon. That argon gets excited, it's non-reactive, but it bumps into the mercury, which is liquid at room temperature. The mercury becomes a gas, goes into the gas phase, is highly energized. It's producing UVA photons of a different wavelength. It bumps into an internal phosphor. That phosphor gets excited, it wants to come to a lower state of energy, so it emits another photon and another energy state. That all takes a lot of heat. Whereas here we have electron flow producing light, using very little energy, much less energy, and very, very little heat. And so we emit that photon at whatever color or wavelength we want. In this particular case, 370, with our Quantum X LED filament lamp technology. So here we have that PN junction. We have free electrons moving toward the holes. The positive side, the depletion layer closes. When the current stops, the depletion layer expands and it stops the flow. LEDs go off. And of course, we can determine for you physics buffs energy of a photon, which is equal to the band gap, if you will, or it'll release that photon at that point, closing of the depletion layer, which equals Planck's constant times the frequency. So we know what that photon energy is. We know that that LED lamp is giving off or emitting or distributing actual UVA photon energy. So let's take a look at the Quantum X LED lamp. It's 370 nanometers. It has a 360-degree beam of attraction as opposed to 120, maybe 180 with some of the earlier generation LED systems. It's called essentially an isotropic or uniform direction of LED light, uniform luminescence and intensity, so that it's a constant or even generation of luminance or lux, so it's not real bright, so it's not offensive to insects, of course, or people. 91.2% fly attraction and capture. We'll look at that a little more as it's very significant. Translucent substrate, which allows the LEDs to emit in 360 degrees, Argon cooled, which is a novel cooling system for our particular lamp. And there's other advantages to that, which we'll look at briefly in a moment. So T5 configuration, FEP shatter resistant. Absent the FEP or Teflon coating, the lamp is IP68 rated against dust and water. 5.6 watts, about 35% less power versus surface-mounted device LEDs. We have 18 filament platforms. Each one has 24 micro LEDs for 432 LEDs per lamp or 864 per light trap. LED filaments emit light at 360 as opposed to 120, which are in the higher power first generation LED insect light traps. Here's an example of a surface-mounted LED, surface-mounted device LED, where you have the light emitted at 120 degrees. It may have areas of luminal intensity that are a little bit brighter in one spot than another. We'll take a brief look at that, but this is an illustration of a SMD in the earlier generation of insect light traps, LED insect light traps. In surface-mounted device systems, the intensity falls off square of the distance as it would with any other electromagnetic radiation. It's more of an anisotropic or unequal turn emission pattern, which allows essentially different values when measured in different directions or the perception of the receiver. Also, surface-mounted device LEDs, if they're become soiled, it can adversely affect the LED. So really care should be taken when cleaning the unit not to touch the individual LEDs or lenses, as these can cause essentially affective or effective functional failure with a surface-mounted device LED system. So it's important to have clean hands when you're servicing insect light traps, and more recommendedly gloves. You should really wear gloves when you're handling insect light traps and servicing these to protect your hands from contaminants and other things that might be on the frame of the system or chassis of the system, as well as the lamps or other surfaces. So, and then with the surface-mounted device LEDs, further, they have a mirror-coated metal heatsink, which disallows emission of light in another direction. It's not clear. It's a metal heatsink, so it activates as heat attracts. Of course, metal expands, so it'll absorb more heat. Even though the LEDs don't give off much heat, but it disallows emission in all directions. So if we look at the spatial distribution of SMD LEDs, you can see at the apex here of the Y, you get the greatest emission of light in that particular direction. And then as we drop off there, we lose that favorable emission of light rather rapidly with individual SMDs as they emit light in one direction. Here we have a illustration of a comparison where we have a lamp cross section. Here we have the quantum X at 360, the filament LED. So you can see the emission there. It mimics UVA light, comes very close to fluorescent light, UVA light, UVA light efficacy. Other LED systems may have a restricted beam at say 120 degrees or a little greater. The quantum X lamp, we have a clear, transparent filament platform which allows emission of light in all directions. And to facilitate that, use a argon cooling system inside the lamp, and the LEDs are inside a lamp. It's a gas-filled system. To cool it, it also attracts a little bit of the heat that they do put off toward the lamp surface, which when the fly is in a more intimate interaction with the light trap can increase the attraction to some degree. And also, can you clean your LEDs? You can easily clean these. Interesting feature of our Quantum X lamps is that they are inside of a cleanable tube. So if you have insect saliva, feces, and handling contaminants, there's no concern there, and they're easily cleaned. We talk about types of reflection that will result in when light interacts with the frame of the insect light trap. There's a lot of design that goes into light traps or insect light trap systems and how they play with light to increase insect attraction. We have different types of reflection, such as mirror reflection, which the angle of incidence equals the reflected ray, so you get a perfect reflection. Specular reflection is reduced slightly, and diffuse reflection it's reduced even further. But specular reflection increases light distribution. Diffuse increases the light by scattering it. So insects perceive and are attracted to UVA light from these various angles and positions, not just direct emission from the lamp. Here we have an example of specular reflection off of the stainless steel frame of the Mantis Qualis, as well as diffuse reflection off of other interior surfaces, including the glue board. Quantum X superior fly capture with 360-degree light distribution produced by 432 LEDs per lamp, 864 per system. Take a quick look at an efficacy study of the Mantis Qualis LED filament light trap system under our model organism here, Musca domestica. Essentially, in the laboratory trial, through replicant testing, Musca domestica caught over a 3-hour period. This replicant testing, 100 flies released into a test chamber, and the number caught was recorded at 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, 180. Interestingly, 100 new flies, the flies from the previous replicant were harvested, and then in the next replicant, a new population of flies equal between male and female, usually less than 4 days old, were released in the test chamber. Of course, the Qualis fly trap was the fly trap being tested by I2L Limited, third-party testing. Musca domestica obtained from a culture, less than 3 to 4 days old, mixed sex flies. Again, 100 new flies, a few new population each replicant. The room was about 132 square feet at ambient lighting conditions. LED filament lamps are 370 nanometers that were emitting about 0.06 watts per meter squared at 1 meter, and we measure at that 1 meter distance. And so it was suspended on a wall about 1.8 meters or 5.9 feet from the bottom of the trap to the floor. And I'll show you an illustration of the particular chamber. Here's an illustration of the chamber. Again, with each replicant, or prior to the new replicant, all flies were culled, and then the room was cleared, the trap was reset as needed, and then a new population of flies reduced, again, less than 4 days old, 3 to 4 days old. equal sex between males and females released in the same location each time. And so we did this replicant testing and came up with some interesting results. Statistics were mean percentage of replicant testing. Here we have an overview with the standard error per replicant, if you will. The time release at 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, and 180, resulting in 91.2% of the flies captured over a 3-hour period. If we put that into perspective with FUVA, or fluorescent UVA light emission, that's up generally around 88%, 90%. So we have equal, if not surpassed, in our testing, in our third-party testing, we have surpassed that of UVA light attraction to an insect light trap. Here's an illustration of that, a graphic illustration, Y over X, slope, and the standard error. So the good news, Qualis fly trap caught an average of 91.2 houseflies out of 100 over a 3-hour test period, which equals, if not exceeds statistically, as far as replicant testing, the efficacy or attraction of fluorescent UVA light. Comparatively, that would be, say, a 2 by 15 watt, 18-inch FUVA system, perhaps, by comparison. We also compared Mantis Qualis, the Quantum X LED filament technology, to 2 other competitor systems, and we did have a favorable outcome. Efficacy evaluation, Mantis Qualis LED fly trap, competitor LED fly traps against houseflies under laboratory conditions, I2L research et al. Another interesting fact, a standard hot melt or high temperature polymer glue activization will not work in an LED system. The hot melt or the higher temperature activation glue boards for fluorescent systems require the heat to release or fully to release the polymer, so it becomes slightly separated and has more capture hold capacity, if you will. It's sort of dependent upon the heat to activate that glue board adhesive to allow optimum capture and hold. When the fly engages the glue board and may attach to podites or perhaps the front legs, and then begins to commit to the glue board, you want the glue board adhesive to have enough tactility or pull-off force to capture the fly. And as the fly struggles, it captures and it further and then begins to entune the fly in the adhesive. Those particular glue boards, or FUVA glue boards, will not work in an LED system. In our LED system, we have engineered, designed, and produced a glue board that specifically works in conjunction with the Quantum X LED filament lamp. It's a lower activation temperature, and so the polymer will engage the lower level of heat that's produced by the LED lamp and result in greater tactility, increased pull-off force. So it's important not to use a standard fluorescent glue board in an LED system because it won't function well because of the heat threshold. Interesting novel LED glue board polymer adhesive formulation. Easy to service. We have a steel frame, stainless steel system. It's HACCP GMP compliant, 3-year warranty. Of course, that excludes lamps and glue boards.
Suspend that trap. We undo this area here, and we're all set just about. Get this trap up and running.
Here are some things to remember when working with light traps. Make sure the trap has a continuous power source and is not turned off at night. Take the competing light sources into account when you select the place to install the light trap. Check light traps on a regular basis. They're especially good for monitoring pest activity, giving you a record of what has been infesting the area you're trying to protect. Replace the bulbs at least once a year, and for best results, twice a year. Just because a bulb comes on does not mean it's effective. Keep light traps clean. Dirty bulbs will reduce the trap's effectiveness, and dirty traps full of dead flies can attract other insects.
A little more FUVA ILT retro with our own Dr. Ted Grasky, well known or affectionately known as Dr. Ted. I want to thank him for his contributions to this program and allowing me to utilize this material. Best practices. As much as technology progresses, many of the best practices remain the same. And with insect light traps, other than moving toward LED lamps, in particular our Quantum X filament LED lamps, which only require replacement once every 3 years, as opposed to annual replacement, cleanable surface, many of those things. But even from a retrospective, these best practices are very, very much significant to what we do. 6,000 Qualis Quantum X systems are currently in the field. We now have the Mantis Cirrus for front of the house, the wall sconce, which can be mounted horizontally or vertically, and also has, of course, the Quantum X LED filament or filament LED technology. So along with our Mantis LED range, we will have, obviously we have Mantis Qualis and Mantis Cirrus, and soon we will have our On Top Pro X. No wall space, no problem, put it in the ceiling. Our On Top Pro 2X, or EXGX for extreme environments where you would have droplets, gases or dusts in the environment, extreme environments, and our Mantis Qualis IPX for those areas of washdown and steam cleaning. So an entire range of insect light traps for all environments using Quantum X LED technology. And with that, I want to thank again a special friend of myself and Pest West in the industry and a longtime consultant educator, Dr. Ted Gronowski, BCE. Thank you very much, Dr. Ted. With that, I want to thank you for your valuable time this morning on this Friday morning this discovery of Quantum X, a novel LED system technology from Pest West. And with that, I want to thank you again for your time. I wish you an excellent day and an excellent weekend.